They say the South remembers, and in this house it felt like everything did. The molding whispered of old money, of whispered arguments over bourbon and inherited guilt, of laughter echoing through porches framed in wisteria. I was raised to believe legacy was as solid as timber and that certain houses, like certain family names, did not pass, they endured. My name is Cassandra Ellis, and I live in the house my great-grandfather built in 1854 just outside Charleston, Rosemere they called it, an antebellum estate wrapped in ivy and myth. When my parents passed, there was no question I would inherit it. I was the only child, the careful one, the one who never spilled the sweet tea, who always wrote thank you cards in gold ink. I married Jackson Hawthorne 6 years ago. He was everything a Southern girl's mother prayed for, tall, charming, with the kind of smile that made people trust him too easily, a landscape architect with calloused hands and a polished tongue. He restored Rosemere like a man wooing a widow, painstaking, reverent. He made her bloom again. Southern Living featured us on the cover, The Resurrection of Rosemere. We framed the issue in the foyer. Our life was a portrait, brunches at the country club, charity galas where I wore heirloom pearls, antique auctions in Savannah where Jackson bartered in smooth, hushed tones. I curated our world like I curated art, meticulously with provenance. I took pride in detecting aesthetic fraud. A fake Regency chair couldn't make it past our front door, and yet lately I'd begun to feel something I couldn't quite name. Like a thread had been pulled behind the walls, nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just a soft hum beneath the perfection. I found myself rereading old estate documents, lingering too long on property records I already knew by heart. I noticed things: Jackson coming home late from site visits, texts he swiped off the screen before I could glance. I told myself it was stress, fatigue. The subtle wear that comes from too many perfectly composed days. But sometimes I'd pass the mirror in the hall and catch a flicker of doubt in my eyes, not fear, not yet, just unease. One morning, Jackson came in from the garden with muddy boots and a grin. "Found the antique iron gate you wanted for the back," he said, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. "Bit rusty, but she's got charm." "Just like this house," I replied and smiled. But my gaze dropped to his phone buzzing in his pocket, unknown number. He didn't notice. There was no confrontation, no storm, just the quiet realization that in a life this carefully arranged, even a hairline fracture could turn a legacy to dust. The changes began quietly, so quietly I almost convinced myself they weren't happening. Jackson started traveling more, always for client consultations, always urgent. At first, I didn't question it. His projects had picked up momentum lately, restoring forgotten courtyards in Beaufort, rewilding old family estates outside Savannah. But the timing, the frequency, something felt rehearsed. His explanations were too precise, too smooth. Then came the cologne, not the earthy cedarwood I'd bought him last Christmas, but something sharper, foreign. Followed by new button-downs, tighter cuts, slimmer trousers, expensive sneakers, and a box from a boutique in Atlanta. "Just trying to feel healthier," he'd said with a grin, flexing slightly in the hallway mirror. I laughed, I kissed his cheek. I told myself marriage evolves, that this was what growth looked like. But my eyes saw things my mouth wasn't ready to speak. Receipts slipped between bank statements, barely visible but unmistakable. A lipstick smear across the corner of a Charleston boutique receipt. A double room booked at the Montrose Inn billed discreetly to our shared business account. I told myself it could have been a colleague, a vendor, a harmless mistake. It wasn't the evidence that broke me, it was the fact that I kept choosing not to see it. One morning, the weight of the house felt too much to bear. I wandered through Jackson's study, pretending to look for pruning shears. His gardening journal lay open, as it often did, filled with sketches of wrought iron fences, native flora, handwritten notes on soil types. Tucked between the pages was a folded piece of linen paper thicker than notebook stock, scented faintly with something floral and expensive. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. "You make me feel like I finally have a home again. Can't wait till this one's ours." Lena, I read it twice, then a third time. The ink bloomed slightly near the edges as if someone had written it in haste, emotion rushing ahead of caution. My stomach tightened. I pressed the paper flat, memorizing the name at the bottom. Lena Worth, 29, designer. I remembered her vaguely, a young woman Jackson had mentioned working with on the Tillman estate restoration. He said she had a good eye for balance. "Thinks in lines and light," he'd told me once distractedly over coffee. I sat down in his desk chair, still holding the note. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my face stayed calm, composed. Years of Southern etiquette kept me still. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply folded the note again, slower this time, and placed it back where I'd found it. A part of me wanted to believe it was innocent. But another part, quiet, long silenced, finally began to stir, and she was done pretending. I didn't confront him. That's what he expected: tears, accusations, a dramatic dinner table reckoning. But I had been raised in a house where dignity was armor, where women cried behind closed doors and rebuilt empires in silence. So instead, I made a call. Elliot Ellis was my mother's sister's son, 10 years my junior, now a billionaire with a scarily intuitive mind for systems, surveillance, and digital footprints. A tech oracle tucked away in a Palo Alto penthouse, wearing hoodies and rewriting the rules of privacy law. We hadn't spoken in months. But when I said I need to know who Lena Worth really is, his voice changed. Discreet? He asked. Silent, I replied. Within hours, he had her name, birth date, employment history. She was born in Montgomery, Alabama, freelance designer with 2 years of spotty income, recently contracted for the Tillman restoration. No parents listed on public record, a short stint in real estate, one closed LinkedIn account, one active Pinterest. That's where things started unraveling. I created burner profiles, one for work, one posing as a boutique garden stylist. I began watching her online presence like a curator studying provenance. Lena's Pinterest was full of styled porches, antique doorknobs, hydrangea hedges, sugar white columns, and there, nestled in a board titled "My Hawthorne House," was my home, my porch, my lemon trees in terracotta planters. Cropped carefully, blurred just enough to avoid suspicion, but I knew that railing, I knew that light. She had tagged the location once in a private Instagram story, future front porch goals. Elliot pulled the archive with ease. There it was, my front door, my grandmother's urn just barely visible on the side table. She wasn't just admiring the house, she was planning to live in it. That's when something shifted inside me, not rage. Not grief, but focus. Cold, quiet, crystalline, the kind that came from realizing the life I'd built wasn't being threatened by chance but by design. Jackson hadn't just been cheating, he had been laying the foundation for a transfer, not just of affection but of legacy. He wanted my house to become their home, and I had no intention of letting that happen. The truth arrived in a secure folder from Elliot, encrypted and time-stamped. Inside were documents, screenshots, transcripts. His message was short: "You need to see this, she's done it before." Lena Worth wasn't some wide-eyed designer swept into an affair by charm and magnolias. She was a strategist, a collector. Her past was neatly buried, but Elliot knew where to dig. In Charleston, 5 years ago, she'd been married to Dr. Robert Elkins, a respected cardiologist and old money heir. The marriage lasted 13 months. She left with his vacation property on Edisto Island and a non-disclosure agreement. 2 years later, she married Dr. Julian Ames in Raleigh, a plastic surgeon with 3 investment homes. She filed for divorce 11 months in, just after transferring one of his properties into a joint holding trust under a false LLC. There were no children, no criminal charges. Just a pattern: quiet charm, swift marriage, strategic entanglement, sudden exit, always with a deed in hand. And now Lena was moving on to Jackson, or rather through Jackson to get to me. The final blow came when Elliot forwarded me a name from the visitor's log at my estate attorney's office. Lena Worth, signed in 3 weeks ago under the title Private Financial Consultant on behalf of J. Hawthorne. She met with Margaret Duval, my late father's trusted lawyer, requesting premarital trust advisement and property integration strategy. All phrased innocently enough to sound routine, except that she'd used the word "our" when referencing Rosemere. I sat at my desk, staring out at the garden Jackson had designed. The ivy curled delicately along the trellis, the boxwoods trimmed with geometric precision. All of it built under the illusion of shared purpose. I thought of the note: "Can't wait till this one's ours." Lena hadn't just been sleeping with my husband, she had been infiltrating my life inch by inch under the guise of soft smiles and clever hands. She'd studied our legacy, walked through my home, and mapped out a future that didn't include me. And Jackson, blind, arrogant Jackson, was too flattered to realize he was just a conduit. The Ellis name, the house, the Southern magazine spreads, all of it was the real prize. She wasn't in love, she was hunting legacy, and she had no idea whose legacy she was stealing from. Because I wasn't raised to burn things down in rage, I was raised to wait, to gather facts, to strike with precision and leave no fingerprints, and now I had everything I needed. The invitation was sent out under my name, embossed cream cardstock, calligraphed in gold ink. Rosemere warmly invites you to the South Carolina Preservation Society's annual Winter Gala, an evening of legacy and restoration. It was the kind of event that lent credibility, whispered status, and it was the perfect stage. Jackson was flattered when I suggested we co-host. "It'll be good for our portfolio," he said, wrapping his arm around my waist like nothing had changed. "You always throw a perfect party." Lena received her invitation directly, hand-delivered. I made sure of that, no RSVP necessary. She would never pass up the chance to walk into Rosemere as the future Mrs. Hawthorne. She thought it would be her public debut, a soft launch of her new identity, sealed by candlelight and wine. She had no idea the room was curated for her downfall. I invited state historians and historic estate developers, the very people who would see through her hollow charm, editors from Southern Living and Preservation Quarterly, people who'd written glowing features on Rosemere, people who knew the name Ellis didn't change hands lightly. I hired a private investigator to pose as an auction house appraiser from Savannah. His job was simple: ask probing questions about Lena's previous design work, casually mention a recent real estate fraud case in Charleston, observe her reactions. Every word recorded, and I planted the final piece: a client. A wealthy widow supposedly seeking a young designer for her family's crumbling estate on the Battery. She would approach Lena with interest, hint at a generous design budget, and a background check requirement. The night arrived under clear skies and cold stars. Rosemere glowed from within, candlelight dancing off gilded mirrors, the scent of rosemary and magnolia in the air. Live jazz curled through the halls. Lena arrived on Jackson's arm in a champagne silk dress, her eyes wide, rehearsed smile polished. I greeted them with perfect warmth, a glass of vintage rosé in hand. You look radiant, I said, kissing her cheek lightly. Tonight is all about honoring legacies, she beamed. It's a beautiful home, she whispered, glancing around like she already owned it. I smiled. Yes, it is. And then I stepped back into the crowd, watching the trap unfold piece by piece. The auction appraiser found her first, disarming and polite, then the editors offering questions that subtly unraveled her resume, and finally the widow, charming, curious, and quietly skeptical. Lena never noticed the net tightening, but I did. Because when you grow up surrounded by curated artifacts and family names carved into stone, you learn preservation isn't just about history, it's about knowing exactly when to let a relic rot and when to burn it down yourself. She wore my earrings, emerald drops set in rose gold, family heirlooms passed down from my grandmother, worn only on Christmas Eve and our wedding anniversary. Jackson had once said they made me look like money and myth. I hadn't seen them in over a year, now they dangled from Lena's ears like trophies. As she stepped into the ballroom, all teeth and charm, I greeted her with a practiced smile. Lena, I said softly, taking her gloved hand, you look stunning tonight. Thank you, she replied, her gaze flicking across the chandeliers. In this house, it's just elegant. The wallpaper in the dining room, stunning choice, so timeless. I tilted my head, eyes lingering on the earrings. Yes, I suppose some things don't go out of style, she laughed, mistaking it for praise. She had no idea the entire exchange, her gestures, her voice, even the way she toyed with her cocktail napkin was being watched. Two discreet cameras hidden behind floral arrangements streamed the gala to Elliot's encrypted server in real time. The audio, captured by the appraiser chatting with her earlier, had already flagged key phrases, shared finances. He said the deed would transfer this year. We've already made decisions about the color palette. Lena didn't know she was narrating her own undoing. Jackson arrived moments later, radiant in a tailored navy tux, 2 fingers of bourbon in his hand. He kissed my cheek too warmly and stood beside Lena like a man beaming with new purpose. Cass, he said, I wanted you to meet Lena properly. She's been helping me brainstorm some incredible ideas for the East Terrace project. Creative partner, really. Creative partner, I echoed, watching the way her hand grazed the back of his arm. How lucky, he smiled, oblivious. She's got such an eye for balance and proportion, and that instinct you always say can't be taught. I turned to Lena, my tone featherlight. Of course, after all, legacy homes require delicate hands and a sense of restraint. Her lips parted slightly, unsure if it was a compliment. I didn't give her time to ask. Instead, I clinked my glass to hers. To creative partnerships, I said. May they always honor the foundations they stand on. And I walked away before she could respond. Across the room, I caught the eye of the appraiser, who nodded once, subtle but clear. Lena was rehearsing her role in a story I had written. She thought she was performing the grand entrance, but this was the final act, and I knew exactly how it would end. The clinking of glasses fell into silence as the room dimmed slightly. All eyes turned toward the makeshift stage beneath the twin chandeliers, where the auction appraiser, really a licensed investigator named Carl Whitmore, tapped his glass and raised his voice with the ease of a seasoned orator. Before we close the evening, I'd like to share a brief case study, he began, his voice rich and measured. A lesson in how appearances can mask intentions. And how even historic legacies, if left unguarded, can become targets of strategic erosion. People leaned in. Jackson stood near the stage, a confused smile fixed on his face. Lena, 2 steps behind him, froze mid-sip. Carl continued. This story involves a married couple, he a respected landscape architect, she a young designer with a history of romantic and financial entanglements across the Carolinas. His gaze swept the room. Their plan. Rebuild a southern estate by quietly removing the wife who built it. A hush settled. Jackson's expression faltered. Let me be more specific, Carl said smoothly. Lena Worth, Jackson Hawthorne, gasps broke the air. Lena's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered. Jackson turned white. Behind him, the screens flickered to life. First, a grainy image of Lena leaving a law office marked with the Ellis family crest. Then emails projected in clear Helvetica font. Once the divorce is finalized, we'll push to liquidate the secondary tract. Cassandra won't fight if she feels cornered. Jackson says she's emotionally fragile, easy to manipulate. We'll make Rosemere the flagship property. Each line landed like a slap. On the next slide, wire transfers, receipts, screenshots of private Pinterest boards. Voice recordings of whispered conversations in hotel lobbies, transcribed in bold. Once she's out, we can finally make it ours. The audience shifted from stunned silence to visible discomfort. One elderly board member gasped and collapsed gently into her husband's arms. Staff rushed forward. Several Preservation Society trustees quietly rose from their seats and slipped toward the exits. I stepped forward, voice steady and calm. Some people confuse legacy with entitlement, but this house isn't just brick and magnolia, it's memory, lineage, and it will not be stolen. I held up a final printed email, Lena's draft proposal to convert part of my family's ancestral land into luxury wedding venues. A murmur of disgust rippled through the room, then quiet footsteps. A woman in a navy suit emerged from the crowd. Judge Evelyn Marston, seated on the Preservation Ethics Review Board, approached the stage without ceremony. She extended a cream envelope toward Lena. Ms. Worth, she said, you are hereby subpoenaed by the South Carolina Licensing Ethics Committee. You may want to retain counsel. Lena didn't speak. Jackson looked at me across the crowd, lost, shaken, betrayed in a way he didn't yet understand, but I didn't flinch. Because I hadn't just protected Rosemere, I'd reminded everyone who it belonged to. All didn't come in a storm. It came in silence, paperwork, cancellations, whispered emails copied to too many partners. Jackson was dropped from his firm within a week. Officially, they cited ethics concerns and conflict of interest in property development. Unofficially, his name became radioactive. Developers pulled out of contracts. Garden Estates removed his credits from plaques. The Design Awards Committee withdrew his upcoming nomination. No one wanted their restoration projects associated with betrayal. Lena's collapse was faster. The Ethics Review Board moved swiftly. Multiple clients stepped forward, some anonymously, citing similar consulting arrangements that mirrored what she attempted at Rosemere. A forensic review of her finances uncovered falsified billing, false identities on loan applications, and confidential information shared across unrelated projects. The charges stacked up: financial misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, forgery. A felony case was filed in 2 states. Her name was scrubbed from 3 design consortiums within days. By the time the Preservation Society issued its formal statement condemning her conduct, she was already hiding from reporters. She tried to sue me, of course. A desperate final grasp accusing me of entrapment, defamation, harassment, but Elliot was ready. The moment the complaint hit the clerk's desk, he released a compiled dossier to the media, sealed records from her first 2 marriages, both strategically buried under settlements and NDAs, property transfers, mysterious LLCs, recycled proposal language from one husband to the next. The story exploded. Serial heiress hunter faces fraud charges. Designer who collected husbands like antiques under investigation. There was no countersuit after that. The divorce went through without resistance. I walked away with 95% of the shared assets, Jackson's design patents, our joint real estate holdings, the investment portfolio I'd quietly doubled over 5 years. Rosemere, of course, remained mine. He didn't fight me. He didn't have the energy. I saw him once, months later, on the far side of a parking lot in Charleston, standing alone beside a rusted pickup truck. He looked smaller, weathered. He didn't wave. Neither did I. I went home to Rosemere that evening. The air was soft. The garden bloomed again, subtler, quieter, without the manicured flash Jackson once loved. I walked barefoot across the porch, the wood warm beneath me. My grandmother's emerald earrings were tucked safely in the family vault. I made tea, I opened a book, and for the first time in years, I didn't wonder what I couldn't see, because I saw everything now, and I had reclaimed it all without raising my voice, without losing my name, without giving up 1 inch of what was already mine. I sold Rosemere in the spring, not out of grief, but clarity. The house had done its duty. It had held the weight of generations, revealed the rot in its walls, and sheltered me through a storm I hadn't seen coming. But it wasn't mine anymore, not in the way it once had been. Legacy, I realized, wasn't about holding on. It was about knowing when to let go. I moved to Austin, a sleek, modern penthouse in a building of glass and silence. No ivy, no oil portraits, no creaking stairwells heavy with ghosts. Just clean lines, open air, and floor-to-ceiling windows that didn't pretend to hide anything. It was the first space I ever chose for myself. With the settlement funds, I opened a boutique firm, ELLIS in Strata, discreet, exclusive, specializing in financial deception and emotional fraud among high-net-worth families. We combined forensic accounting with AI-driven pattern recognition, digital trails of intent, not just transactions. Most of our clients were women, but not all. Betrayal had no gender. Truth, I learned, leaves fingerprints everywhere. You just have to know where to press. Within a year, we were vetting prenups for billionaires' daughters, uncovering fake offshore holdings, and quietly stopping social climbers in their tracks before they could rewrite history in someone else's home. My past made me credible. My calm made me dangerous. I became a speaker almost by accident. An invitation to a tech ethics summit turned into a standing ovation. The title of my talk, Emotional Deception in the Age of Social Branding. I spoke of charm as a currency, of curated lives masking calculated ambition, of how modern predators don't hide, they post. It went viral. I don't talk about Jackson or Lena, not directly. But when women approach me after conferences, teary, breathless, clutching flash drives and secrets, they know I understand, that I've walked through the fire in heels and silence and come out on the other side with receipts. Sometimes I miss the hush of South Carolina mornings, the sound of wind through sugar maples. But I've learned that peace doesn't live in a porch swing or a family crest. Peace is being able to sleep without checking receipts. Peace is building a life no one can quietly take from you, and this time the legacy is mine alone. The wind is warm tonight. I sit barefoot in my rooftop garden, tea cooling beside me, the Austin skyline humming in soft light. Succulents and jasmine vines surround me in neat, deliberate order. Nothing here is accidental anymore. Everything in this space was chosen, cultivated, protected. Justice, I've learned, doesn't come roaring through doors. It moves slowly, like sap through old wood, like ink drying on a notarized page. It arrives not with applause, but with silence, with stillness, with knowing. Everyone wants revenge to look cinematic, fire, fury, ruined reputations in real time. But true justice, it's quieter, sharper. It's watching the people who underestimated you walk into the traps they built for you themselves. It's reclaiming the pieces they thought you'd never notice missing. It's drinking tea on a rooftop you paid for in a city where no one calls you anyone's wife. It's choosing who you become after the war ends. They thought they were playing chess with a woman who couldn't see past the dining room table. They didn't realize I'd inherited a legacy of queens who always controlled the board. My grandmother who taught me how to read silence at charity luncheons. My mother who hosted garden parties while hiding the family's financial survival behind polite smiles and well-placed stock transfers. The women in my line didn't raise their voices, they rewrote the rules. Now I do the same with clients, with contracts, with a voice calm enough to slice through gold. Sometimes people ask if I miss the house, if I miss him. If I do anything differently, I don't. Because survival is one thing, reinvention is another, and what I built in the ruins of their schemes, it wasn't revenge, it was evolution, and that, I promise you, is far sweeter.